Thank you all for coming and welcome to the Robert C. Byrd Center for Congressional History and Education, which has very graciously allowed West Virginia Rivers Coalition to put on this program about PFAS, the forever chemicals. Any of you who saw the movie Dark Waters know what forever chemicals are. If you didn't, you're going to know what they are after this panel discussion is over. Each of our four very distinguished panelists is going to have about 5 minutes for an initial presentation, and then we're going to throw it open to the group for questions from the group here. Unfortunately, we cannot take any questions from the folks out there on Zoom. We don't have the technical capabilities of doing that. But since we have about 50 people here in the audience, I think we're going to have plenty of questions from here. The whole purpose of this is to get support for a bill that West Virginia Rivers Coalition is supporting in the current session of the legislature. And we have some very good news on that front. We finally have a bill that is going to be introduced tomorrow in the Senate, and it is Senate Bill 485. So remember that in your after this is over, we're going to ask you to call and contact all of your legislators and ask them to support Senate Bill 485. Now, pretty soon we're also going to have a House version of the bill, and Delegate Evan Hansen, one of our panelists, will be the lead sponsor of that. But I think it is important to mention about this Senate bill. It has 8 sponsors in the Senate, and 2 of them are from this area. Senator Charlie Trump from Morgan County, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, is the lead sponsor. And we're very grateful to him for being the lead sponsor. And another one of the sponsors is Senator Patricia Rucker of Jefferson County. Some of you may be surprised at that. I am not. Senator Rucker and I have actually become pretty good friends in recent years. And while we don't agree on everything, there are a number of issues where she finds herself in agreement with a lot of people in this room. So anyway, to start off the panel discussion, the first person on it is Jenna Dodson, who is staff scientist of the West Virginia Rivers Coalition. And before that, there are some handouts outside. Some of you got them, I know, but if you didn't, there's a handout describing how PFAS works and the problems it causes. There's a handout with all of our legislators on it and their contact information. And there's a handout that shows by Senate and delegate district where particular problems with PFAS are. So take any or all of those handouts, and please, if you haven't signed the sign-in sheet, do so before you leave. We really appreciate it. So Jenna Dodson, take it away.
Can you all hear me okay? Okay, no, all right. Can you all hear me okay now? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate you all coming out on a kind of cold, rainy night. So I'm gonna start us off here and just talk a little bit about what are PFAS, why they're concerning, and what we know about PFAS and source water on a statewide level across West Virginia. So PFAS is an acronym. It stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and they're a group of man-made chemicals, a very large group. There's about 10,000 to 12,000 different types of PFAS, and they're known as forever chemicals. You've probably seen that in headlines on other news sources because they don't degrade in natural conditions. And they have been around for a while. So they are used in consumer products and industrial manufacturing and have been since about the 1950s. So many common items that you all are familiar with contain PFAS, including nonstick cookware, carpet, food packaging, and firefighting foam, just to name a few. And they are known toxins that can cause adverse health effects at very, very low levels. So just to expand on that a little bit more, last year the EPA came out with interim drinking water health advisories for 2 specific PFAS, 2 of the 10,000. That is PFOA and PFOS. And those drinking water health advisories were at the level of parts per trillion. So for some more context there, a part per trillion is about 1 drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So we're talking about very, very, very small amounts of these chemicals can cause adverse health effects. And those health effects can include reproductive issues, low birth weight, and various types of cancer, including kidney cancer and liver cancer, among other health issues. So they are concerned. And so what's been going on a statewide level in West Virginia the past couple of years, in 2020, the West Virginia Legislature passed a resolution requiring the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Health and Human Resources, so DEP and DEPR, to sample the source water or the raw water of all the public water systems across the state. So what I mean by source water or raw water is going to be that water in rivers, streams, or groundwater before it goes into the water treatment plant. So we're talking about pre-treated water. So they did that. They partnered up with USGS and they conducted that sampling, and those results were released last summer. And so what those results showed was out of the 279 public water systems that we have in our state, about 130 of them had concerning levels of PFAS that were above those drinking water health advisories that I previously mentioned. Now, it is notable, right, that they sampled the raw water. They did not sample the finished water or the treated water. So they're currently sampling the treated water at many of those water systems, and those results are expected a little bit later this year. And so I think in summary, it's very concerning and notable that just under half of our public water supply systems, so 46% of our water systems have concerning levels of PFAS in the raw water. And at West Virginia Rivers, we really believe that the responsibility for addressing PFAS contamination, it should not fall on the ratepayers. It shouldn't fall on us, right? And it shouldn't fall on the water utilities either. PFAS pollution really needs to be addressed at the source, and so we are looking to our state legislature to take action to ensure that that is the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Our next panelist is Brent Walls, who is the Potomac Riverkeeper. And Brent, before you start into the meat of it, could you explain to us what a riverkeeper does?
So a riverkeeper, I'm the Upper Potomac Riverkeeper for Potomac Riverkeeper Network. We have 3 riverkeepers in the Potomac watershed, and I manage from Harpers Ferry to Fairfax down, which includes the Eastern Panhandle here in West Virginia. We have 3 riverkeepers. There's 13 riverkeepers in the Chesapeake Bay and about 300 riverkeepers worldwide. We are the voice of our river. We do what we can to protect the public's right to clean water. And that's really where this all started to kick off is clean water. In 2017, I've been on this journey and understanding PFAS and all the different sources where this PFAS comes from. And the more you look, the more you see, and the more you understand that this is a huge, huge problem, not just here, but it is worldwide. It is not just the United States, it's not just in the Chesapeake Bay, it is worldwide. So I've been on a journey to try and understand all the different sources. In the beginning in 2017, I started collecting samples and a couple of streams just outside of the Air National Guard base here in Martinsburg, where there was a groundwater contact from the spring that goes into the Big Springs treatment plant. This is why I drink water to Martinsburg. Well, that same spring and hydrological connection also impacted the rivers and streams, small rivers and streams here in the area. When we sampled those streams, we had about 1,000 to 500 parts per trillion levels of PFAS, which is alarmingly high. And I also did some sampling of the various different private wells in the area, and also found some impact, not as high, but enough to where it should cause some alarm. The further thought that I started on was, if it's in the water, is it in the fish? And that's when I started to work with USGS here in Leetown, West Virginia, Vicki Blazer personally. They've gone through great lengths lately to run fish samples and send the blood plasma and fish tissue samples in to get tested. And the results from those are just astronomical. We're looking at 500,000 parts per trillion of PFAS in the blood plasma of smallmouth bass. So these fish that were tested were caught actually in the mouth of the antenna. But smallmouth bass have a very, very large range in this area and can easily go up to 3. So I'm in the process of collecting fish samples in the Pecking Creek to understand the levels of PFAS in those various different fish. We're looking at various different fish species, especially the kind that are caught and maybe taken home and have for dinner. The point here is trying to understand whether or not we need some fish consumption advisory. We've been a part of fish consumption advisories in Maryland. There's one on Piscataway Creek, another military base in that area that has caused a significant problem. But the fish are, you know, this is a huge concern. EPA has collected some fish species up and down the Potomac from DC all the way up to Cumberland, and they found, again, alarmingly high levels. So it's in the water, it's in the fish, but it's also in all the products, like Jenna had said, all the products that we use. I collected samples at a wastewater treatment plant effluent, Smithsburg, Maryland, and Hagerstown, 2 completely different size facilities. One is all residential, Smithsburg. The other one has Hagerstown is commercial, industrial influences. Both had significantly high levels of PFAS. What that means is our wastewater systems are contributing PFAS to the problem of our rivers and streams, and the Potomac is where we draw a lot of that water for drinking. Right here in Shepherdstown, a big source is the Potomac River. So it's a huge concern of ours to try to understand what we're dealing with, where all the levels are throughout the state here, West Virginia and the state of Maryland, and then Pennsylvania and all over the place. But here, this is our focus. So I'm very happy that West Virginia is putting forth some legislation. We're doing the same thing in Maryland to try and understand the levels of PFAS in our water resources. And with that, I will turn it over.
Now, Brent, I want to ask you one more question about the Riverkeeper. Is this like a private association, nonprofit, or are you government employed?
Oh, no, we're nonprofit. So,
Okay.
yeah, we're nonprofit. We utilize memberships and grants. And so if anyone can help us out with, you know, some extra money, that would be great. I'm not up here begging, but at the same time, it's very expensive. These tests are incredibly expensive, $400 per test, and you're getting anywhere from 13 to 20 different compounds up to 10,000. That's been mentioned. So but these are all the most important ones that we're looking at.
Thank you, Brent. Our next panelist is from right here in Jefferson County. Rod Snyder is now the Senior Advisor for Agriculture to the Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. In other words, he reports directly to the head honcho. And we are very pleased and gratified to have him. So Rod, proceed. I know you've got to come over here because he's got a little slideshow for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I would have never figured that out. John, thanks for the introduction. I was very excited about this event because it gave me an excuse to work from home today instead of being in DC. So, again, my name is Rod Snyder. I serve as Senior Advisor to EPA Administrator Michael Regan. I'm a political appointee in the Biden administration. So I started here at EPA just under a year and a half ago. I'll just start by saying I am not the foremost expert in PFAS. I do not have a technical background per se. I do, however, sit on the PFAS Council within EPA, which is a senior leadership team that's trying to help guide and direct policy. The reason for that, which I'm not going to get into as much tonight, but I'm looking at the intersection of PFAS in the food and ag system to understand what the implications are for farmers and also for the food that we eat. Again, setting aside, I'm not going to talk about that so specifically tonight. I'm here to more give a general overview of how EPA and the federal government is responding to this really significant challenge. So over the next few minutes, I just want to quickly talk about the agency's PFAS strategic roadmap. I'm probably going to skip the background on PFAS because I think Jenna did a great job of explaining what the chemicals are. I'll talk about EPA's overall approach and goals, the progress that we've made since the beginning of the Biden administration, and then a little bit around new funding within the bipartisan infrastructure law to help address these challenges. So I'll just start by mentioning that my boss, Administrator Regan, his background before coming to be at EPA and serving in President Biden's cabinet, he was the Environment Secretary in the state of North Carolina. And North Carolina has had a lot of challenges as well with this issue due to some manufacturing facilities. So when he arrived in 2021 at EPA, this was not a new issue for him, and he knew how significant it was. He decided to make this one of the signature issues that he was going to work on during his time at the agency. And in April of that year, just right after, really within a month of his arrival and confirmation by the U.S. Senate, he set up this PFAS Council to try to bring a holistic look at the issue. That roadmap that was the PFAS roadmap that was developed by the council really was to bring a holistic vision and strategy for how we were working on the issue. The roadmap achieves several goals. First, it sets timelines for concrete actions that takes us through 2024. It fills a critical gap in federal leadership. As we looked around, it didn't seem that any particular agency was really kind of taking ownership of this issue. It's intended to support states' ongoing efforts. We've had a lot of conversations with West Virginia DEP over the last year and a half. And of course, I should also mention, I'm not here in an advocacy role. EPA doesn't take positions on any particular pieces of legislation, but from an informational perspective and from a federal state coordination, we do work a lot with the state of West Virginia on this issue. And then just building on a broader commitment to restoring scientific integrity to the work that we're doing. If I was a chemist, which my father is, many of you know Herb Snyder, he should explain this slide. I'm not going to. So part of our goal here is to take a full sort of life cycle approach to PFAS. We need to get upstream of the problem. A lot of times by the time we're sort of measuring the amount of PFAS in fish or in our streams, the problem was initiated far upstream with facilities that are far flung from where we are because of how persistent the chemical is in the environment. So fundamentally, how do we get upstream of the problem? How do we hold polluters accountable? How do we ensure science-based decision-making and then really prioritize protection of disadvantaged communities? That's all part of the broader PFAS roadmap. There are 3 activities within the roadmap that everything is sort of built on. First of all is research. EPA has an Office of Research and Development that is investing in looking at innovation to increase our understanding of PFAS exposure and toxicities, human health and ecological effects, and then effective interventions that incorporate the best available science. Really right now, if you look at, which I would talk about in a moment, some of our most aggressive federal regulatory actions are really only around anywhere from 4 to 10 of the 10,000 chemicals. In part, that's because we're still very early in the research process to understand the impacts of the broader class. We're really trying to prioritize those that are found most often in the environment, and that we have the most amount of information on. But the research pillar is trying to help in deeper understanding. Second is restricting, pursue a comprehensive approach to proactively prevent PFAS from entering air, land, and water at levels that can adversely impact human health and the environment. I'll talk just in a few minutes a bit more about that strategy. And then lastly, remediate, broaden, and accelerate the cleanup of PFAS contamination to protect human health and ecological systems. One of the ways in which we have been doing this is actually with local water systems. We talked about the situation in Martinsburg. Administrator Regan and I traveled to the Eastern Panhandle last June in Jefferson and Berkeley counties and met with stakeholders in Martinsburg, and Senator Capito actually joined us on this trip Because if you go back just a few years ago, the city of Martinsburg drinking water supply was deeply contaminated. And there was not a good option for remediation, and to have a small town, you know, I guess Martinsburg is not small by West Virginia standards, but universally, it's not a big town, not a big budget, to bear the cost of remediation to somehow clean up the water it's untenable for most local communities. So the federal government stepping in to help fund that in terms of remediation is a critical piece of our role here. I want to talk just for a moment about accomplishments since the roadmap was launched in October of 2021. And I'll be quite quick on this, but first is that we have, for the first time ever, proposed to designate PFOA and Pfas, the two most common, as CERCLA hazardous substances. What this means is that if you've heard of the Superfund law, it would have put these two chemicals into the Superfund law, which means that companies have to report if there's a minimum of 1 pound of a release into the environment. Companies have to report that. Right now, we don't know where these chemicals are emanating from because they're not currently listed under the Superfund law. So this would help to correct that. It also would allow us to hold those companies accountable for cleanup costs. So that proposal was put out just at the end of last year. There's a public comment period, and we're moving towards finalization as we go through this year. As Jenna already mentioned, we released drinking water health advisories. We took a little bit of criticism for that because they were set at thresholds that sometimes are below our testing ability. But the reason our Office of Water set those thresholds is because we know that's the point at which health effects begin to occur. So as the testing improves, we'll be able to get that testing better. What we want to understand is, when does it start to affect people's health? And then put that out as a scientific number. Those are not enforceable levels yet. I'm going to talk in a moment about the drinking water standards, but the health advisories is what we released last year. We're working on drinking water data. We began distributing $10 billion in bipartisan infrastructure law funding to address emerging contaminants in water. Some of that will begin to go to systems like the Martinsburg water system and others that are dealing with this problem. Expanded the scientific understanding of PFAS and translated the lay of science into cross-agency efforts, used enforcement tools, and began engaging with federal partners in the public. A big part of my role is working with USDA, Department of Agriculture, and the Food and Drug Administration, for example. Wrapping up here quickly, priority actions for 2023 and beyond. We do intend, I think one of the next major actions that everyone is waiting on is building upon the drinking water advisories last year. We will be proposing a national drinking water standard, an enforceable standard, hopefully sometime this spring. What this means is that every drinking water system in the United States would have to be able to treat water to that enforceable standard. It would be one of the most significant actions that the Biden administration will have taken at this point. Take a final action on the Superfund CERCLA designation, improve chemical data and safety by reporting and limiting new resumed PFAS uses, restrict upstream discharges to waterways, address PFAS and biosolids, which are often land applied, and then provide public PFAS tools and engage with communities. I'll mention there's a new interactive mapping tool that we just released in the last week or two. Dan and I talked about the fact that it's probably a little bit incomplete in terms of data sets at this point. We're trying to pull in other sources of data, but it's built as an infrastructure where the public across the entire country can go and look and see where there's been various testing in the environment. We're going to continue to build additional data like from USGS and other sources into that tool. And then last but not least, this is my last slide, just to mention the help that I think Congress has provided here in the last 2 years. The bipartisan infrastructure law really did get at emerging contaminants, $10 billion that went to EPA's Office of Water, $4 billion goes to the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So that is allocated directly to states, including to West Virginia under a funding formula. Same with the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And then small or disadvantaged community drinking water grants, especially getting to those communities that just can't bear the capital costs of cleanup and drinking water systems. So that's a very quick sketch overview of EPA's leadership on this issue, and just looking forward to the questions and engaging more with the panel. Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Rod. And now our final presenter is Delegate Evan Hansen of Morgantown, who is going to be the lead sponsor of the House version of the bill. The way the legislature works is, if you've got something that you really think you got a chance of passing, you try to have the bill introduced in each house, and there will be separate bill numbers for those. Evan, so what I'd like you to do is tell us what the plans are and what the bill will do.
Sure, thank you. How's the audio? You can hear me?
Great.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for organizing this. And I wanted to start by recognizing what's being done at the federal level. I think everything that's being done there is very important. And it's a bipartisan effort that's getting that done. What we're trying to do at the state level is ensure that the responsibility doesn't only fall on the drinking water utilities, on the public water systems and their ratepayers, that to the extent possible, we could identify the sources of PFAS in our communities and work on regulatory and non-regulatory methods to hold them accountable so that they can reduce pollution in a manner that doesn't necessarily pass on those costs to you and me. So like John mentioned, there is a Senate version that's already been introduced. That's Senate Bill 485. And there will be a House version that should have a bill number within a matter of days, hopefully by the end of this week. And it does three main things. The first thing that it does is it focuses on those 130 communities that Jenna mentioned at the beginning of the event today, those 130 communities where PFAS has been detected in raw water for a public water system. And it requires the State Department of Environmental Protection to write action plans for each of those communities to do their best to identify where the PFAS is coming from. And for each of those PFAS sources to identify either regulatory or non-regulatory actions to address the PFAS at its source. So there are some details we can get into in question and answers if people have more questions about it in terms of the timing of those plans and exactly which systems go first. But essentially, there is a planning component in the bill. The second part of the bill is focused on facilities like manufacturing facilities and other facilities that have knowingly used PFAS chemicals in their production process recently. And it requires them to self-report that to the State Department of Environmental Protection. And after they self-report, it then requires the DEP to put monitoring requirements into their Clean Water Act permits so that we could make sure that we know what's coming off of these sites where PFAS was used in the production process. Again, there's some details there that we talk about if people have questions. And then the final thing that it does is it anticipates what Rod Snyder mentioned a few minutes ago. He talked about the EPA coming out with a national drinking water standard. That's going to be a standard for what comes out of the tap, but we also expect the EPA to come out with national water quality standards for what's allowable in the rivers and streams. And this final provision of the bill anticipates those water quality criteria under the Clean Water Act that the EPA is going to come out with for what's allowed in the rivers and streams. And it requires the state DEP to propose adopting those national recommended water quality criteria into the state water quality criteria rules. So, and what that would do once those are adopted in the state of West Virginia is it provides another tool to identify where the pollution is and to hold the polluters accountable. So that's essentially what the bill does. We can go into more detail if people have questions. I did want to recognize the co-sponsors in both the House version and the Senate version, not necessarily by name, but to recognize that it is a bipartisan effort. Like John mentioned, several of the sponsors on the Senate side are Republicans, and I expect the same to be true on the House side. And a lot of work went into this bill, not just among legislators, but among various groups that have an interest in this matter. And I hope that because we have a relatively wide group of people supporting this bill, that it actually will have a shot at running this session. So I'll leave it there, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Evan, Delegate Hansen. If you would leave your camera on, because I'm sure there'll be some questions come to you. I'm going to exercise moderator's prerogative and ask the first couple of questions. And both of them are to the entire panel. First of all, we've been talking about water systems. And I'm deducing that we mean public water systems. What about people on wells? Are they more vulnerable than people who get their drinking water from a public water system? And I would like to throw it out to whichever of the panelists wants to answer it, or all four of you.
Well, I would have to say it depends on where your private well system is. What we have here in Eastern Panhandle and part of Maryland is karst geology. So our geology is full of holes, and the water that is on the surface can easily get into our groundwater and into the reservoirs below us where our private wells are tapping into. And that's exactly how the migration of groundwater from the Air National Guard base and the use of HFF got into the spring that was the source of the drinking water. It's that connection. And so there was an effort to look at any private wells within that potential pollutant area. I don't think there's going to be a wide spread concern for private wells across the nation for PFAS. However, I think it's something that should be on everyone's minds because we're still using the products, and those products are then being put into our septic systems. And our septic systems are nowhere near any of the complex abilities of removing chemicals like some public facilities. So you're having those chemicals go into the ground, subsurface ground, in water. So that eventually over time will build up in the soils. And so I think it's something that everyone needs to be aware of. But there are things you can do. There are things that you can do in person in your home to kind of remove some of those pollutants.
Any other panelists want to weigh in? That about it? Okay, thanks. Sounds like in particular with karst around here, we should be of particular concern.
For sure.
Thank you. Actually, that's, I'll leave it. Let's go to questions from the audience. I've got another question, but I'll only ask it if we run out of questions to ask, which I doubt we will. Yes, right there. And if tell you what, yeah, let's could come up to the microphone, and then when you're done, if you can hold the microphone and give it to the next person who's
Okay.
yeah, that'll save some time.
Is it on? Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for this panel. Hats off to West Virginia Rivers and for the work you're doing, but to each of you for what you're bringing to this. Thank you so much. We've been in need of this. I have a question about the self-reporting component, and it's kind of a twofold question. How confident are we that self-reporting will really yield the level of knowledge that we need from the manufacturers? And the second is this whole family of chemicals, how interchangeable might they be? And what is the possibility that if you're a manufacturer, you could simply change from one of the family that you've self-reported to another one?
Who wants to take that?
I could take that. It sounds like that's related to the bill. So the first part of your question was how confident are we in the self-reporting? And I think this is just one tool in the toolbox. Regulation under the Clean Water Act is largely reliant on self-reporting. So it's not an unprecedented way to do this. So should this bill pass, it will be state law, and there would be an expectation that they follow the law. That being said, this is only one tool in the toolbox, and there's other mechanisms that are requiring some level of reporting. For example, when permit cycles are up and permit renewals need to be done, there is also an opportunity and a requirement to report on what's being currently used. I think what's a little bit different here is that it requires the facilities to look back 5 to 6 years on things that they've used in the past, not just what they're currently using when they're going up for their permit renewal. In terms of substitutes, there are substitutes for PFAS, and sometimes one PFAS will substitute for another. And I think that that's why I think that the federal approach is so important. It has so many different prongs to it, including research and other things. It's recognizing that this isn't as simple of a issue as just identifying a small number of pollutants and addressing each of the small number of pollutants, but it's a much broader problem to wrap our hands around and to figure out the right way to regulate. And so it has many different levels of regulation using different environmental laws. And I think that's how ultimately you get at this problem and make sure that substitutes are not just invented that get around the problem, but are just as toxic as the original substances.
Well, who's next? And I'll tell you what, those of you who want to speak, come on up to the microphone here, and then, yeah.
We had another answer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Whoops, my bad. I'm doing a bad job as a moderator.
Well, I
Proceed.
hesitate to even respond because I don't have a technical background, but our Office of Research and Development is looking into the question of different toxicological profiles of different PFAS compounds. So they do not all behave the same. I think we know that that's the case, and it is going to take a significant research to determine what is an appropriate substitute or not, and that work is really underway.
Thanks, Rod. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would add to that a little bit, and I would say that kind of substitutions have already happened, so we've seen that in the past already. So for example, PFO or PFOA was the substitute chemical was Gen X, because they thought that wouldn't be as harmful, and in fact it is arguably as harmful. And also for PFOS, the substitute chemical was PFBS, which those 4 chemicals all together are what the health advisories last year were released for. And so I would say, it seems from what I've seen from the EPA's Office of Research is that they're taking like kind of a class approach to researching these chemicals. So like he was saying, the ones that behave similarly, they're kind of like classifying those in a little box, and they're saying, okay, maybe we can look at these ones as one group, right? These certain group out of the 10,000, and look at these ones because they behave similarly as this other group. And so I think in the future we'll see more of that like group and that class approach which will help hopefully, so the substitutes that they use will not be as harmful as ones used previously.
Thanks. Brent?
And I just wanted to say too, that it's looking at trying to stop the cycle, and there's a lot of little areas that we can go to stop the cycle, and that is coming. One is coming right from the source. And so in Maryland last year, we put a bill through that banned certain products. But not only did it ban those products with PFAS, it banned PFAS as a family. And that means a family has all of the PFAS groups, all 10,000 of them. They cannot be used in certain products manufactured in Maryland for food packaging, cannot be used nature's lab, cannot be used in rugs and carpets. And so that is one mechanism that a lot of states are utilizing.
Thank you. And those of you who are going to have questions, if you would kind of sort of very mosey over very in a relaxed manner over into here. When one question is asked, we can then pass the microphone on to the next person, save a little time. So if you would go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Thank you for the group of four here that is so aptly presented a very technical subject matter that is on point for the public at the moment. I have two questions real quick. The first, to Mr. Snyder, I believe, from the EPA is those of us who are well informed of the roadmap and have read up on it are very impressed with the actions taken and the diligent reporting of the EPA on the PFAS steps and the progress made today, because that roadmap is what, now a year and a half old. So congratulations on that. You hit a hiccup in December in that you promulgated the PFAS water quality standards, and you signed off on them and sent them to the OMB at the White House. And they have not sent them back to you with permission to publish by the date that you had said you would. So I'm interested in the answer to that question. My second, so Mr. Snyder can prepare, is what is the science that we're using in the West Virginia promulgation of our limits and you know, for the water quality? What is the science behind this? Because respectfully, the science is very, very complicated. And the health advisory limits that we heard reported on earlier are reported in hundreds of parts per trillion, which are below method detection limits of any technology that we currently have. So I'm wondering what science are we going to use to pick the numbers out, put down on paper, to hold industry and communities accountable for? My questions.
Thank you. Rod, you want to try the first one, and maybe Evan's the one to answer the second one.
Sure. Well, you mentioned that you're impressed with the roadmap. I'm impressed that you know where the rule is. Where it's sitting. But you're absolutely correct. So it did go to the White House Office of Management budget per normal course of action. It is taking perhaps a little longer than we thought in interagency review, which means we are still getting feedback from other federal agencies. I'm reviewing some of that myself. I've talked to the administrator as well as to Assistant Administrator Radica Fox, the head of the Office of Water, and we are just as committed today on January 25th as we were in December to get this thing out and get it done as quickly as possible. But we can't circumvent that sister agency review with the other federal agencies, and we're just trying to work through that as fast as we can. It doesn't mean that our commitment is waned or that it is any way going to not happen. We're just trying to wrap up that process, that's all. But I appreciate you paying attention.
Evan, did you have any response to the second question he asked?
Yeah, at the state level, it depends on whether we're talking about the Safe Drinking Water Act standards or the Clean Water Act standards, because those are going to be different things. For the Safe Drinking Water Act standards, so like the maximum contaminant level, the MCL, once those are promulgated at the federal level, those would be immediately or shortly thereafter enforceable by the public drinking water systems across the state of West Virginia without us needing to take further action. So in other words, those would just be in use in West Virginia once the EPA takes action. Now for the Clean Water Act water quality criteria, which regulate what can be in our rivers and streams, those are not automatically in the state rules. Those have to be adopted by the legislature. And so that's why the bill that I was describing earlier includes a provision that requires the DEP to immediately begin to adopt those into the state rules during the next legislative cycle once they're finalized by the EPA. And then in terms of the second part of your question about the science and the low concentrations that we're talking about, while it's true that the laboratory methods we have available right now don't go down quite as low as the human health advisories for PFOA and PFAS, that's true. They still go down pretty low and can detect these substances at single digits of parts per trillion. So essentially compliance at this point is whether or not you detect those substances. And if you detect them at the single digits or higher, then you're going to be above the human health advisory that have been promulgated so far. Now we're going to have to see where the MCLs end up. The MCLs that are promulgated by the agency at the federal level may be significantly less protective than the human health advisories because they're not just based on the science of what harm people, but they're also based on sort of the practicality of meeting those levels. So that's an open question about where those levels are going to end up and how those line up with the detection levels with the laboratory methods.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I just wanted to mention that the PFAS or the PFOA level promulgated under HAL is 1,000 times less than a trillion. It's 4 quadrillions of a gram per liter of water. So we're talking about asking us to interpret data from labs that can't yet. We don't know of a lab that can even report these kinds of information. So I just throw that out there is that we're very concerned that we're chasing something here that's going to be very complex, difficult, and perhaps costly, as was pointed out, the level of the test already. And that's at the, what, 4 or 5 parts per trillion level. So I conclude with that, but thank you for the answer. That's very reassuring.
Thank you. And David? Next questioner?
Hi, David Lillard, Jefferson County. I have a comment more than a question. You might have heard me express delight to hear that Senator Rucker had signed on as a co-sponsor. As of yesterday, she hasn't. She heard from some constituents, many of you, some of whom were in this room. And she signed on. I'm not saying that Senator Rucker or Delegate Hansen or in his time, Mr. Doyle just put their finger up in the wind to see how it was going, but they like to hear from people. They like to hear from people, especially on an important bill like this. And so we really have a role to play in this. And this is a good bill and a bipartisan bill, and I hope we'll all do our part to see it through.
Thank you. Next.
Yes, I'll second and third the thank yous for being here. We started the conversation with rivers and streams and the PFAS in water. Well, we had the conversation of PFAS in food fish. Now, should we be concerned with the apples we eat, with the chicken we eat, with the beef, with the garden vegetables that we grow, using the water that is contaminated with PFAS? Just as a, how far, how wide does this thing go?
Whoever.
Yeah, that's actually definitely me. So first of all, fantastic question, and it's one that I've now been wrestling with for the better part of the last year with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration. And there's not a simple answer, but I start by pointing out the fact that FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago now, did some random sampling and some widespread testing within the broader food supply, 500 or 600 samples across different types of foods. And it only came up with about a dozen or so detections, which is really good news, which means that this is not necessarily a widespread problem that should make us all afraid to eat. But there have been acute circumstances in places like a wide known problem with a dairy in New Mexico that was near an Air Force base. Maine, where some pulp and paper mill, like biomass that had been using chemicals at the mill, was applied to the land. It was then uptaken by the crops. There are places where it is happening and it's acute in those places. And so more testing needs to occur. And places where there's a suspected problem, we're gonna need to test. And also, more research is underway around things like soil remediation and things like that, because the other thing I'm worried about for the farmers is it could be a death knell to your business if you can't use your land. So we're working with USDA on some of those things as well. So I think it's not a crisis. It's not like it's not that it's everywhere, but it is in some local areas a problem.
Thank you.
Next.
Thank you. And thank you once again to all the panelists for giving us all this great information. And I'll be very interested to hear on what you think we can do as constituents moving forward. Like you, Rod, I'm not a chemist, and don't get me near a beaker. But you know, I do play around with Google a little bit, and it can be a dangerous tool, I understand. But just in the short research that I've done in the last 10 minutes, I just found out that, at least according to one site, 3M Company is the sole manufacturer of PFAS, PFOS. I want to know if that is true or not. And they apparently have faced over 3,500 lawsuits around the country. And one of the largest lawsuits against PFAS is against the 3M Company. And I want to know, and apparently they entered into a voluntary agreement with EPA in 2017 to eliminate production moving forward, but that won't terminate until 2025. So I guess I'm wondering why voluntary? Why do we have to wait for them to stop manufacturing PFOS? And the other part is that the other major companies, there are 5 or 6 that I saw that are really major, BASF, which you can understand, and also, of course, DuPont. Now, it strikes me that DuPont, I think they're based in Wilmington, Delaware. And I think our current president is based in Wilmington, Delaware. So if we don't get it done now, we're never gonna get it done. And I'd like you to please comment on that. Thank you.
Whoever.
I mean, I can kick it off. I mean, in researching how PFAS have come about, you're right, 3M was the originator. They were the creator of this chemical because of its abilities to work in AFFF and putting out fires for aircraft because their jet fuel is so volatile. It's able to smother and remove oxygen instantaneously. And that's how they were able to put out these fires. And that was in 1950s. And so that creation of that chemical exploded into other manufacturing purposes, which was then utilized by DuPont. And I believe there's several DuPont factories here in West Virginia. And so that was an epicenter of some significant problems that were understood by EPA back in the 70s and 80s about the toxicity of PFAS, but because it was such a useful chemical back in those times, and I guess in a sense today, it's been put in so many different products. And there are significant concerns about having 3M and DuPont own up to what they have created and how prolific they have developed this. It is worldwide. And that's what's so great. Their products have gone worldwide. The technology has gone worldwide. The use of PFAS has gone worldwide. It's banned in some other European countries. And it was supposedly phased out by 3M and supposedly phased out by DuPont. But the problem is there's 10,000 derivatives of the same fluorinated carbon chain. And so, it's a continuous, and I think it's going to be a continuous effort to try and figure out how we can stop the cycle of PFAS and have those who are responsible own up to it and pay for the damages. And I think that's what you're seeing is a lot of these lawsuits, a lot of the state attorney generals are filing lawsuits against 3M DuPont to help pay for all their water systems to be updated and upgraded.
Anybody else?
Well, I'll just mention, because I think you're referring to some of the EPA actions with those companies, that the 3M agreement was under the last administration, so I'm actually not that familiar with the enforceability of it or what have you. But the litigation pressure is certainly increasing. Beyond that, I don't think I should say much about the pending lawsuits.
Next question?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but did you not say at the end of your presentation that there was something we could do at home to alleviate some of this problem? And could you elaborate on that?
Sure, yeah, definitely. So, private or public water users, there are technologies out there that are readily available at Lowe's, and Home Depot, where you can go and get these small reverse osmosis systems put into your whole house reverse osmosis systems that can help eliminate majority of the PFAS in your system. I'm not 100% sure on the research in, does it remove all of it, but from my understanding, it removes it down to the levels that the MCLs and the EPA is considering. Charcoal filters sometimes can help reduce the levels. And so, those are a couple of things you can do at home. I think mostly what you can do at home is start really thinking about the products you use. Because those products then go into the system. Any makeup or something that you apply to your skin that's waterproof, anything that says waterproofing on it, that has some component of PFAS chemical. And so that's being washed down in drains. Your T-belt pans, your non-sticks, go cast iron. I love cast iron, go cast iron. Just don't do any of the non-stick pans ever again, because that stuff can be washed in your dishwasher, bleached, and go into the systems. And there are a lot of different stain removing, wonderful laundry soaps out there. Again, PFAS related. That's why those stain removers are there, able to lift the stains out. It's because it's got PFAS in it. So probably doing a better job of us is understanding and learning what products are out there that have PFAS in it. Yeah, just the other day, I just saw a product that said right on the top, this is PFOS free. I was like, wow, that's like the first time I've ever seen that on a box. It was great.
Anybody else?
Yeah, a couple other common things maybe to be aware of. I mean, Scotch Guard, right, that was made from 3M, so that's something that you might want to stay away from. And carpet, because of like carpet cleaners and stain resistant substances that are put in carpet. I'm not saying everyone should go remodel their home, but if you're going to, maybe consider not using carpet. If they're using hardwood floor or vinyl or something like that. And also microwave popcorn bags. So I would avoid using microwave popcorn. And because if you don't have a cast iron, and you are gonna use some of your nonstick cooking ware, then cook it on low heat. That's another recommendation. So, and if you're gonna cook something on really, really high heat, then we would recommend using.
Next question.
Hi, y'all. Once again, thanks for your work on this. I really appreciate it. I wanted to bring the conversation back to the Eastern Panhandle region, because I'm biased, that's where we live, but also because I think it's a really important place to be looking at this problem. So as a lay of the land, as background has been discussed, we know that one of the most contaminated places in the state of West Virginia is where we are standing and sitting right now. However, my understanding is that this is not unique to the Eastern Panhandle, and this is an important piece of context. It's not unique to the Eastern Panhandle, but we are in a hot spot. The other hot spot reported by the USGS is in the Ohio River, the alluvial aquifers along the Ohio River. So in this context, I would like to hear some thoughts about what unique, given the unique challenges, as Brent mentioned here, and we're all drinking from the same cup. This is karst aquifer. We're all drinking from the same cup. So given that unique challenge, I'd like to hear from Rod and others about what the EPA can do. I noticed that in the strategic plan, the stated goal was to get upstream of the problem. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense for our region because any drop of contaminants going into an aquifer can move in all sorts of directions. It's not just an upstream problem. It's more of an all-around problem. So that's a challenge. I'm wondering, so the first part of my question is that thinking part of the discussion within EPA and how can we, as citizens living here, help move that discussion along? And I'd also like to ask Delegate Hansen, and I appreciate the work on this bill. When we think about the water providers, it's important to note that many of the places that are showing contamination are small municipal providers. We're talking about elementary schools, talking about primary schools. We're not talking about large municipal waters. For example, Shepherdstown recently upgraded our water supply system and it's fantastic. Good job, Shepherdstown. Not every community is able to do that. So I'd like to know from Delegate Hansen, are there provisions for very small producers of quote unquote municipal water, such as Blue Ridge Elementary, Blue Ridge Primary? These places are contaminated in their raw water and we need to watch that. So I'm sorry, this is a convoluted and long question. First part, EPA thinking about cars. Second part, Delegate Hansen thinking about small municipal providers and the special needs there.
Rod?
Thanks for that question, Dan. So I think what I'll just start by saying when I think the roadmap refers to upstream of the problem, that doesn't always necessarily physically upstream, but also like supply chain, for example, or within our economy, because a lot of times we're not detecting or finding the problem until it's being tested in drinking water supply. We have to figure out upstream and where to come from. And so I think that the circle designation and some of the requirements around Superfund reporting and all of that will help us get more transparency around the origination point. The other problem though, of course, is that it persists in the environment for a very long time. So where it is already there, we have a bigger problem. So, I don't know the entire answer for karst geology and what the specific community is going to need, but I do think that the steps that EPA is taking around the research, around remediation and around reporting and more transparency will at least help us get to know the extent of the problem, and then we can make more informed choices from there. And then the new money that has come in through the infrastructure law and whatnot really should help even the small water systems to be able to tackle the problem, because at the moment we just don't have enough money to do it. So,
Thank you. Yeah. Delegate Hansen.
I've got a similar answer to what Rod just said, is that the way the bill is written, it doesn't distinguish between the large and the small. And you're absolutely right. There are schools like you mentioned, so there are very small systems like that that have had PFAS detected in the raw water, but then there are also some very large public water systems across the state. But what the bill does, whether it's small or large, is it'll, number one, make sure that we've confirmed that the detections in the raw water are being found in the finished water. And number two, do our best to identify where the pollution is coming from so that we could stop the pollution at its source. And if that's not enough, and it won't always be enough, or we may not be able to find the sources, there will be a need in some situations to install treatment at the water system itself. And hopefully some of that federal money can be used not just for the larger systems, but for the smaller ones as well.
And if I could follow up, Delegate Hansen, on that, and I think you alluded to it earlier, the passage of this bill, if we can get it done this year, will not be the end of the journey. We will no doubt, if this bill is passed, find things that probably would need to be included in a subsequent bill in some subsequent year.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And this is a very measured approach compared to what's being done in some other states, but it's an approach that I think is feasible in terms of actually getting it done. And if we learn more and we need to take further steps in the future, we should do that.
Yeah, we have one more response, at least.
Yeah, so I think a lot of times people say, oh, the infrastructure money, but I think it's also important to follow where that infrastructure money flows to and flows from, right? So it's coming from the EPA, a lot of it is being distributed through the state revolving fund. And so that is right now, within the Department of Health and Human Resources in West Virginia. And then to get a project that's gonna be able to access the funding in the state revolving fund, then you need to kind of get in with the West Virginia Infrastructure and Jobs Development. So it's quite a process. I would point out to access the infrastructure fund. However, I did speak with a person at DHR who kind of oversees the drinking water SRF program for West Virginia, and I asked her specifically about PFAS contamination, like the potential for contamination in drinking water and what she's doing, and she assured me that they are conducting outreach to impacted utilities. And so we didn't go into so much detail and specify that there's outreach to elementary schools or anything like that, but she did indicate that outreach is being conducted to utilities with known potential.
And Delegate Hansen, in line with that, it is my understanding that there's a pretty good chance that the Department of Health and Human Resources might be broken up during this session of the legislature into 2 or maybe 3 different departments. So it would be important to know where this particular fund is going to end up, in which of those departments.
Yeah, that's true. And most likely the DHHR's water related functions are going to end up at DEP.
Oh, okay, great. Next question.
First of all, I would like to congratulate the panel. This is a very high quality group of people who are talking to us this evening. A little background, I am a chemist by training.
Get up here.
The first question is no. I worked in the chemical industry for many years, and part of that time I did health and safety work and environmental control work. And we dealt with water, NPDES permits, all of the, and that was complicated, and we worked hard to be in compliance. I see this situation as being an order of magnitude more complex than what we were dealing with, especially with 10,000 different chemicals. But I've got one question and one comment. The question is, I'm on the water board here in Shepherdstown, and 2 of my colleagues are here as well. The water board or the water department has just finished, or is in the process of finishing about a $2 million upgrade to their system. There's no thought of what they're going to do about PFAS yet. PFAS, that's easier. If we find significant levels of PFAS in the Potomac, there isn't any current way to remove that in the drinking water system that we have. Is EPA doing any research on removal techniques, technologies to remove PFAS so that even if it is present in the raw water, is there a way to remove it to get it out?
Yeah, yes, there is technology and ongoing research. I think Brent mentioned a couple of them already, but the reverse osmosis technology and some charcoal-based technologies have been effective in some places as well. And in fact, we know that the Martinsburg system was brought back online because of the installation of technology after a very serious problem due to, I mean, just to be frank, the airbase was, I think, the source. So it can be done. It's not cheap, and I think that's what we all need to be sort of wrestling with respect to the revolving fund money and things like that.
The comment I have is a couple of weeks ago, the Board of Education, they're building a new school on the outskirts of Shepherdstown, and they had a choice of taking their water supply and their sewage sending their sewage to Shepherdstown for treatment, taking their water from Shepherdstown. And they decided not to do that on the basis of cost. I think there was a $250,000 difference in cost. So they're finishing up putting in a well system for the new school and also septic system. I think that's a very short-sighted decision that they made, especially now that we're hearing so much about PFAS. I just wonder if the Board of Education is getting themselves into by using a well as their drinking water supply, getting themselves into a highly complex both issue, both technically and politically. So I don't wonder if you have any comments on that and whether they should go back and I think they should do change their mind.
Brent, you're from Maryland, so you can make the way up.
Well, yeah, so I don't know, I mean, it's a serious consideration that I think needs to be looked at for every single facility that we put in place. And especially our kids in school system, in particular. I can't really say whether or not they should spend an extra $250,000 in pump. But at the same time, it's understanding what's coming from our groundwater is going to be important, and smaller systems there are some relatively inexpensive ways of reducing the PFAS levels in smaller systems. And when you get into larger systems like metropolitan area like DC, and you have millions and millions of gallons being drawn and trying to clean, that reverse osmosis system becomes much more complex, much more expensive. And so those are the things that we're gonna have to be trying to tackle, and the research is continuously trying to look at that. Not only just for drinking water, but for wastewater too. And we have our wastewater systems that are supplying effluent, supposedly clean effluent, but it's only clean to the point where it's removing the solids and the bacteria. It's not necessarily focused on the chemicals and the metals that are also in that sewage. And so PFAS gets through all of that. And there needs to be some technology, whether it's reverse osmosis or charcoal filtering or whatever it may be, but we have to start deploying that same kind of technology at that other end.
Anybody else? Next question.
Again, just to echo what so many people have said, thank you so much for the expert presentations. I'm curious about something. I know in the history that this country has had with the tobacco industry. After some X amount of time, we came to learn how early the tobacco industry really did understand how dangerous and deadly their products were. And I'm wondering if anything has begun to emerge in terms of either whistleblowers or court cases or anything that might suggest that the industries involved, DuPont, 3M, really did early on understand what they were doing. And how important is that to the goal of a different, not upstream literally, but the upstream kind of holding of accountability for responsibility for cleanup and doing something serious about this array of problems you've outlined for us.
Anybody?
I can, say something. Well, I would say, from my understanding, I'm gonna use the Parkersburg example, right? So DuPont was the industry that was discharging, mainly PFOA, but other PFAS as well, into the Ohio River, and it contaminated the drinking water for residents in the Parkersburg area. And so to my understanding, they never admitted fault. They never said that, they knew that it was gonna give people kidney cancer and all these other types of cancers. However, there was a class action lawsuit and a very extensive health study that was done over the course of, I think, over 10 years, maybe even about 20 years. Because they needed to be able to link the exposure to the PFOA to the cancer in that specific community over a long period of time. And they did make that linkage. So if you look up the C8 health results studies, then you can get more information from the documents that came out of that class action lawsuit and what those health studies found, because they made that linkage. But even when that linkage was made from the chemical that DuPont was discharging to the cancer that these people are suffering from and probably continue to suffer effects from, they never admitted fault. So I would not think that's a likely scenario we're going to see in the future, just based on
Anybody else? Next question.
So I have a question. May I say more for the audience? I'm Sue Kemmetzer. You met my colleagues. We're all on the water board. Please come to our meetings every month, the last Thursday at 12:30. If you have concerns, tell us. And it sounds to me like it would be very helpful to our community to have the state make these steps to enact legislation and get us going on the path of having more resources to understand and maybe solve some of these problems. So my final point is that, yes, West Virginia rivers and Potomac Riverkeepers are nonprofit organizations. I support both of them with cash donations. See how good these people are and how much they are based in science and responsible thinking. So I'll just leave you with that thought. Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Karen Valentine. I am going to piggyback on a little bit of Sue's humanistic approach, and David, thank you for what you said. Everybody up here has done an excellent job, and we need every scientist, every nonprofit, every politician. I know the hard work that you're doing, Delegate, down in Charleston. These people put their all into what they're doing, and it is so important that we sit here and learn everything that we learned tonight, but then act on it. Because it's that action that gives hope. It gives hope to the younger generation who is very underrepresented here. Thank you for some of them that I see in the audience. That gives me so much pleasure to see you here. But it's on our shoulders. Our politics are so jaded. It is so terrible to watch, heartbreaking in many ways. And if we keep that torch and keep doing the hard work, make the phone calls. I've heard people say, well, I'm not gonna call that person because they're a Republican. They're never gonna vote for it. We have to elevate ourselves. We have to get out of that mindset. Thank you for making the point over and over that this is bipartisan, and we have to step so far away from getting caught in this trap. These phone calls work and they're important. We have to keep up the hard work, and that's on all of us. And I'm so happy that everybody came out tonight, and you know, we've all raised these kids in this community that are doing great work. And I'm just really proud of everybody for coming out and learning more about this. Thank you, John, and everybody here. It's really important. So now it's on us to make those phone calls.
Thank you, Karen, for the opportunity for a segue. It's just what Karen said. The reason we're here is we need to get this bill passed. And what I'm hoping everybody in the audience here and on Zoom will do is contact the state legislators from the Eastern Panhandle. Again, there's a sheet of paper outside that has all 11 delegates and all 4 of the state senators. It has their email addresses and their office phone numbers. Please do both, email and call, and in so doing, be positive and be respectful. And in particular, with the 2 people we know that have already signed on as sponsors, be sure to thank them for doing it and let them know that we appreciate the fact that they're willing to sponsor this bill. That's Senator Trump and Senator Rucker. And again, for the others, just encourage them to support the bill. Also take with you the information sheet that we have. And that way, if for some reason one of them asks you a question, you know, what about blah, 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 you'll have a sheet in front of you that might have the answer to it. So again, this is what we need to do, and I want to thank everybody for coming. I believe we're thinking about having another one of these events about a month from now, toward the end of February. And there are a couple of documentaries on PFAS that we're gonna, what we'd like to do is show one of the two. And they're both really good, and we're in the process of thinking about which one to do. The Byrd Center has very graciously offered to let us do it here, and it'll be the last week in February, and the reason for doing it then is the way the legislature works. The 50th day of the legislative session, which is something like, I think, the 2nd of March, it's whatever that Saturday is, the 1st or the 2nd, is what is called crossover day. It is the last day that a bill can emerge from its originating house and still be under consideration. The last 10 days of the session, the Senate only considers House bills that have been sent to it by the House. And the House only considers Senate bills that have been sent to it by the Senate. So we need to make sure one of these two bills gets out of the originating house by the 50th day. So that's the reason for the time. Yes, John.
What are the bill numbers again?
We have one bill number that is Senate Bill 485. So when you call the senators, mention Senate Bill 485, and particular, make sure that you're appreciative to Senator Trump and Senator Rucker for being sponsors of this bill. Again, we don't have a bill number for the House yet, but as soon as we get one, I will endeavor to get that out to everybody. That's it. Thank you all very much. Let me hear that.